Matter of weeks, Digimon Ghost Game will be coming to a close. Finally! I've been sitting through this plotless garbage for too long. For being a series of the same formula being recycled in every episode, this show ran for way too long. By now, a more plot-driven season of Digimon would have been over by episode 54, not 67. I wouldn't mind the length if it was enjoyable and interesting, but Ghost Game felt incredibly basic, and the characters were boring. Hoping they can turn things around for the finale, but I have no hope left for this show. Even so, I can't write it off until it's over, so here's my review of Digimon Ghost Game before the finale. Now, the show was honestly fine for the first almost 30 episodes. Plot lines were fairly different from each other, we introduced all the characters and their champion evolutions, and we hinted towards some bigger plot points. The show had a good setup and gave viewers something to look forward to. Fast forward almost 40 episodes and the show proves itself to be the worst piece of Digimon media I've ever watched. Worse than Hunters, worse than Atmon, and worse than Digimon Adventure 2020, which I actually liked, don't at me. At this point in the show, you realize that the formula that gave us some decent episodes for the first portion of the show is going to be milked to death for the duration of the show's run, not only using really similar plots for almost every episode, but also taking forever to make any progress in the plot. And by forever, I mean this week's episode 64, when we reach the show's climax, and we only have like 3 episodes left. This is a disaster. It's one thing to take forever to reach the climax of a show's plot. It's another when you take forever to reach the climax of your own episode. Every episode is basically tease the antagonist like they're scary. Waste 70% of the episode as the protagonists try to track down the threat. Step 3, now this is the important part. The protagonists find the threat, fight it, defeat it, and clear things up. If we're lucky. The other side is that they get their butts kicked and they have to pull a victory right out their butts just to end the episode. This is the plot of almost every episode and it gets old fast, especially when all the characters are boring. But more on that later. Ghost Game's whole deal is that it's horror themed, the Digimon being kinda like ghosts. However, the horror almost always boils down to body horror transmutation. Episode 28, a Saruman takes people's faces. Episode 30, people get turned into dolls. Episode 34, people are turned into gecko mutants. Episode 40, people get twisted around like jello or something. Episode 43, people are growing painful eyes on their body. Episode 49, people are turned into mice. I could go on and on. Most of the episodes are extremely predictable, so even in this poorly paced show, we also have to deal with watching essentially the same episode several times. There's no fun watching our protagonists overcome the odds when the odds are the same in every episode. Furthermore, by making every antagonist some creepy horror person, you lose a bit of the threat Digimon antagonists have had in the past. We had Digimon who wanted to take over the world and were legitimately intent on killing others. The antagonists of Ghost Game often end up being more of a nuisance, affecting a small number of people in ways that end up being easily reversed. There are very few stakes, and the stakes we do have are taken care of with little issue. There's no feeling of earning the victory, there's no satisfaction in success, just glad that yet another slog of an episode is over. That wasn't enough. I don't care about the characters, so when Digimon go around torturing humans, it fails to resonate with me. It just feels like we're preying on the innocent, which is pretty weak considering we could be having major confrontations between powerful Digimon. Instead, we're watching humans being abused by Digimon on a weekly basis. As of writing this script, Digimon Ghost Game is 64 episodes long, and I believe it's set to get 3 more. For reference, the original Digimon Adventure was 54 episodes long, almost all of which were contributed to the story or character development. Digimon Fusion was 79 episodes long, but that was broken up into 3 parts, one of which was my least favorite season. Digimon Adventure 2020 was 67 episodes long, and while it did have a lot of filler, it also had actual character development, action, and story progression. Ghost Game does not have that. The closest thing we get to character development in Ghost Game is a couple characters are getting their actions and the one time a protagonist overcomes his fear to save his friends. Action? Half of these episodes don't even have fights, and the ones that do sometimes put in minimal effort to create an interesting bout. Even Hunters knew how to make a good fight and interesting action. Story progression, as I and others have stated, is pretty much non-existent, with hints of a bigger plot being nothing more than teasers that are apparently culminating right now. I sat through 64 episodes to only now reach some relevant storytelling. Any other season of Digimon would have given me this at least 20 episodes ago. I'd be lying if I said I didn't consider abandoning the show a couple times. Now we're getting on the characters. A lot of people actually argue that one of the show's strengths is its characters. After all, by having 3 humans and 3 Digimon as the main focus of the show, You can focus on developing them more and keep the episodes more streamlined. Or at least that's what you'd think. As I said, the pacing of each episode is pretty slow and uneventful, so fewer characters did nothing to streamline the plot. The characters aren't even interesting. You've got Hiro, the bland middle schooler who only has like 2 traits that make him distinct. You've got Ruli, who's mostly just interested in investigating occurrences involving Digimon. Then there's Kyoshiro, who's just the scared one. At least the Digimon balance things out a bit, with Gamamon being cute and Angoramon being smart and resourceful. Jellymon is kind of insufferable and annoying. Even then, the Digimon are left to bounce off of boring humans, which leaves them feeling pretty lackluster too. Well hey, at least they get to work together to overcome the odds, right? Wrong. Almost every episode has at least one of the protagonists get incapacitated by the antagonist, removing them from the battle and forcing someone else to handle it. Somehow, with less characters, they've created an environment that encourages the day to be saved by a single character duo. Other Digimon seasons had a lot of characters, but they often worked together to achieve their goals. In Ghost Game, most episodes shine the light on one human and their Digimon, leaving the others to fall victim to the enemy in an often forced way. This makes every threat feel insignificant or like they just got lucky, as opposed to empowering the one person who saved the day or making the villain seem more intimidating. The show is formulaic, and it shows. Digivolution and stronger forms have been a staple in Digimon ever since it first debuted, and I can't think of a single evolution that felt undeserved, forced, unnecessary, or boring. Okay, I can think of one, but that's besides the point. The point is, Digivolutions in Digimon Ghost Game didn't feel special. They didn't come at a climactic time when the heroes needed help the most. They just showed up in one of the many instances in which the heroes are about to be beaten. In the past, Digivolution was a glorious moment in which the protagonist gained new powers that would be pivotal in fighting stronger foes in the future. Here, it just feels like we're filling the quota for evolutions. There's no build-up, no past implications. We just decided to Digivolve one episode because we had to do it eventually. Heck, the Digivolve forms don't even really make a difference. A fight with Seriousmon isn't much different from a fight with Battle Gamamon. It's still just trade blows until something happens, or get wrecked by the enemy and wait for someone to save me. If that's not enough, the protagonist evolutions are either boring or weird, in a bad way. Battle Gamamon is just Gamamon, but bigger and redder, like a less cool Flamedramon. Wezen Gamamon is cool, but I can't get over the fact that he has guns under his feet. What's the point of guns pointing at the ground all the time? Kano Weissmon just looks like a Bakugan, not bad by the show standards, but bad by past design standards. Seriousmon looks boring, and the pink accents clash with his white armor. Simba Angoramon goes for a completely different vibe than Angoramon. Lamortmon looks like a nightmare with his bat face and ears, massive gauntlets, weird wing appendages, and a sword. For once, I think a Digimon has too many accessories, and that's saying something. Dear Ribbitmon is incredibly boring, like a less interesting Sakuyamon. Thetismon has too much going on. Again, we just threw gauntlets onto a Digimon that didn't need them. Yeah, the designs here are odd, bizarre even. The only one I actually like is probably Amphimon, looking like a Power Ranger in a deep-sea diving suit. Honestly, I wouldn't even have a problem with the designs if the Digivolutions were more relevant or I liked the characters more. In Adventure 01, I wasn't a huge fan of Garudamon or Lilymon at first, but they grew on me because they were relevant characters that did important things. Meanwhile, you could probably count on both hands the number of times Angoramon's become Lamortmon, and half of them would result in him getting his butt kicked. If this show's lazy attempt at horror wasn't enough, the motivation of the antagonist will really make you question the show. Now, not every antagonist is bad. Digitamamon and Warumanzamon made some kind of sense and were actually scary in their own right. Then you have Mummymon and Gigasmon, who completely misunderstand how humans work and nearly kill them in an attempt to save them. Mummymon tried to mummify humans because his research on human health was several thousand years old. Gigasmon thought humans would go extinct because he watched a movie trailer about the apocalypse and thought it was real. So he started turning them to stone to preserve them. This takes a lot away from the antagonists and makes them feel unjustified in their actions. I mean, we spent an entire episode dealing with an antagonist who has no idea what they're doing when we could be expanding on the plot, and we do this in several episodes. It makes the episode feel like a waste of time, especially when we've had much better antagonist and enemy encounters in past seasons of Digimon. I mean, what's more intimidating? Oliamon trying to eat a hapless side character because of a misunderstanding, or Kuwagamon trying to kill the protagonist because he's a savage beast? I know everyone has different tastes, but this was a big point of contention for me. You thought I was done talking about the characters? Well, get this. The only relevant humans in this show are the 3 protagonists and Hiro's father, and he's probably got less than 10 minutes of screen time across all 64 episodes. Every other human in the show is either a one-off side character, a recurring side character who falls victim to the episode's antagonist, or a random background character who never does anything. Now obviously, many past Digimon shows didn't put much focus on humans other than the protagonists. That's usually because the protagonists are in the digital world and there are no other humans around. Besides that scenario, it's usually because the humans aren't being affected by any Digimon, or they're simply not relevant to the plot or characters. In Digimon Adventure 01 and 02, humans weren't aware of the Digimon, and when they became aware, they were powerless against them, so they fell victim to the Digimon. Even so, the protagonist's family members were still mildly present for backup and support. Digimon Tamers completely flips the script by having an entire organization of humans who know of Digimon and are taking steps to defend against them. Same goes for Digimon Sabers. The only series that follows a similar trend to Ghost Game is Atmon. Even then, they disguised their actions as technical failures in apps and machines, so humans weren't aware of Digimon, and the problem generally fixed itself before people could really worry about anything major. And again, the humans only found out about Digimon once it was too late, and they were powerless against them. Ghost Game has very few excuses for humans being not only oblivious, but also unprepared for disasters involving Digimon. The three protagonists have several peers who've had close encounters with Digimon. Having them feel irrelevant makes the world feel fake, and I end up not caring about anyone other than the protagonists, if even them. Why include them or focus on them if they're never going to do anything relevant? Then there's the fact that no one really seems to question the disasters Digimon cause. Yes, many people write off Digimon as hologram ghosts. Yes, many people forget what happened after the Digimon is defeated, or simply assume it was a dream. Yes, some occurrences could be viewed as mere accidents, natural disasters, myths, etc. Yes, most battles take place outside the human world and aren't seen. However, this doesn't cover up things like objects randomly twisting in ways that defy logic, teenagers being rapidly aged, eyeballs growing on people's bodies, and an entire town flooding. Surely, more than one person has experienced these occurrences and connected the dots without being written off as a crazy adult or an imaginative child. The fact that all of these things happen, and they've probably been happening for a while, and not a single person has done anything about it beyond posting to an online forum, really breaks immersion and makes the world feel fake and tailored to the show's needs. I can't be worried about the livelihood of the people who fall victim to Digimon if the world doesn't even feel a little bit realistic. Overall, I can't be bothered to care about characters being tortured when they're all just cardboard cutouts, and I can't be bothered to care about a world that's so unaware of its own problems. What we really could have used is a character with some authority having to deal with all these myths, before finally learning it's all real firsthand, and he or she starts taking strides towards stopping these threats. Now this next part's a bit of a mixed bag. On the one hand, you have Clockmon, the antagonist of the first episode, who made a comeback in episode 9, only to be quickly reformed. I feel that his reformation was too fast, but at the same time, Clockmon became one of the more interesting characters in the show after reforming, so I didn't mind this. On the other hand, you have Dracmon, who debuted in episode 3 and came back in episode 25, only to be killed and overshadowed by a stronger antagonist. Barring the fact that this was laughably ironic, why bring him back in the first place? You made a villain, teased at him coming back, brought him back, and killed him before he could do anything relevant. You could have killed any old Digimon if you wanted your main antagonist to seem more threatening, so why waste your returning villain? Did you change your mind on bringing him back and wanted to write him out of the story? If that's the case, then this show clearly wasn't planned out well. Our final example is Felismon, who debuted in episode 15 and fled with the promise that he'd return. 49 episodes later, and he hasn't shown up once. We haven't even mentioned the guy. We could have removed the part about him wanting to come back, and the show wouldn't change in the slightest, and unlike Dracmon, he wasn't written out. I know he's still got a few episodes to come back, but I feel that bringing him in now will heavily distract from the plot that the show is actually trying to tell now. It'd be too little, too late, at the wrong time, no less. He's honestly better off remaining forgotten, and that's a huge mistake on the show's part. I've considered multiple times throughout the show's run if maybe I'm being too hard on it. Perhaps bias clouds my mind, as I can only think of good past times as opposed to accepting what's new. In short, maybe I'm comparing Ghost Game to past seasons too much. It is true that my past experience with the Digimon anime has set a standard for my expectations, and this has led me to heavily criticize the show. It severely lacks the positive themes that would empower characters of past seasons. It lacks intense action and storytelling that culminates into a climactic plotline. The designs are different, the characters are different, the settings are different, almost everything is different. Where lies things that I don't like, there may lie things that others adore. It's all a matter of opinion and personal experience. Does that mean my criticism of the show can merely be written off as the ranting of some nostalgic fanboy? Not at all. While many things are heavily up to personal opinion, like action and character designs, other things are a bit more blatant. The pacing is still slow as heck. Characters start out floundering like they know nothing, only to be suddenly thrown off the deep end and land squarely in the climax, often with little to no build. Side characters are still irrelevant, even though they make frequent appearances throughout the show as friends to the protagonists. Drakmon and Felismon were still handled incredibly poorly in terms of making a comeback. Stakes are still super low, and we treat antagonists as being a huge threat even though they're stupid, misunderstood, or don't pose much threat. Lastly, the show still took 64 episodes to reach any relevant storytelling, even though it dropped hints and lore as teasers throughout the entirety of the show's run. Say what you want about my criticism, but some of these points can't be overlooked. Now, while doing a bit of research on what people thought of Ghost Game, I found an article talking about how the show is accessible for new fans. This actually made sense when I read it, as a good bit of newer Digimon media is tailored to Digimon fans, so they skip over a lot of explanations due to their target audience already knowing a lot about what's happening on screen. This felt especially true for me when I watched the Digimon Adventure reboot. I really enjoyed the lack of stopping to explain things because I was already accustomed to the series' gimmicks and lore. I could piece things together myself, and didn't feel like the show was holding my hand and slowing down for me. However, someone less familiar with Digimon might not see the appeal of certain references or Digimon appearances, and they'll be less confused as the show introduces new concepts and rules every few episodes. Ghost Game kinda glazes over all that. It doesn't bog people down with information. It doesn't introduce new concepts at breakneck speed. It doesn't throw lore in your face and expect you to piece it together yourself. It doesn't even start with a full cast. It takes till episode 5 before the full cast of 3 humans and their Digimon partners are fully introduced. Furthermore, while I don't like the lack of character development or climactic evolutions, it means that people can jump into just about any episode and understand it without too much prior knowledge. Besides the evolutions and a few recurring characters, each episode is really its own standalone experience. Furthermore, Ghost Game goes for a fairly different theme and mood than previous seasons. This helps it to stand out from the other seasons, and might welcome viewers who weren't interested in the normal formula used for Digimon seasons. Lastly, as much as I dislike the show as a whole, I did enjoy a few episodes, even after the 30-episode mark. Episode 37 with Raremon had a good balance of storytelling and action, and I was actually invested in the plot. It might have been the closest thing we got to a traditional Digimon episode. Episode 49 with Witchmon didn't have much going on overall, but it did briefly bring back Pumpkinmon from episode 4 to help Hero. There's also the ending, where Witchmon simply gives up because Halloween is over, and she no longer has the boost in power she needed to create a city of witches. It's somewhat comedic, doesn't take away from what the protagonists accomplish, and is unique among Digimon defeats in the show. Episode 60 with Cathilamon was cool because there were actual stakes at hand. Cathilamon and his divers were corrupting humans and flooding the surrounding area. It felt like there was actual danger present, and it made sense when Hiro and Ruli were put out of commission, forcing Kyoshiro and Jellymon to beat Cathilamon on their own. Episode 63 with Quartzmon was interesting because not only was Quartzmon portrayed as quite powerful, thus not portraying the severity of his original anime debut, but it also made him a good person as he only hurt the humans to protect baby Digimon. Plus, the afflictions he put on humans was fairly severe, and having it affect Ruli made things more interesting, as well as removed Angoramon from the inevitable battle in a realistic way. As much as I didn't like the show, it definitely had positive notes. In conclusion, as much as I dislike the show, it's far from the worst one I've ever watched. For the most part, it's just not as good as past seasons of Digimon, and this made it incredibly disappointing to watch, especially when it took so long to progress the plot. I'll definitely stick around to see how the show ends, but I don't expect it to get better. They can do whatever they want to fix things now, but it doesn't change what's already been done. With all this in mind, I can say without a doubt that Digimon Ghost Game is my least favorite Digimon anime of all.